Uh, I'm going to start the recording there. All right, perfect. And thank you very much for that introduction there, sir.
Mhm.
I think your work on our work on the TBI advisory board and your long tenure as a vocational counselor and rehabilitation specialist are important and important perspectives, especially when we're looking at the chronic care of brain injury and the community reintegration stages, which is really what we're going to be talking about today,
Right.
right? For our module 11 of 12, right? Almost there.
Yeah.
And so, same as always, disclaimers. The opinions voiced in this workshop are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect those of Providence St. Jude Medical Center. The contact provided in this workshop is for informational purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. Please consult with a healthcare professional for advice regarding any medical condition or treatment. While not mandated, please keep any and all information shared amongst other attendees confidential and within this virtual room. I must break that confidentiality should anyone become reasonably suspicious of abuse of a child, other or a dependent adult. And as a reminder, each of these meetings is being recorded as well as each of the 12 morning sessions in this workshop series. And so Perfect. So today, good morning. Module 11 for community reintegration. Right, we are going to be really beginning the integration of all of the things that we've kind of been talking about, and then putting them under a lens of, well, what is the practical value of this, and who, like, what is the name of the person or persons that I need to contact so that I can take steps depending on what my specific symptoms and problems are, right? And so as a disclaimer, further disclaimer for all of the things that we're going to talk about today, which will be a number. It's not completely comprehensive, but it's a good initial sampling of what's there. And so, um, not everything that we talk about is going to be required or necessarily even appropriate for all people. So we have structured our modules so that way the way we think about how our interactions and our symptoms and our sensations and our triggers, and then all of that will be we're layered in an order that will naturally, hopefully, um, really identify this specific symptom or problem for which there maybe typically is a professional that is best suited to target and address those concerns. So, going back, right? Our core four strategies. So, who's been keeping up on their home for their stuff? Automatic places, right? The decorative bowl by your bed, a calendar, either hard copy or on your phone, right? I'm a big Google person, right? And strategy four, your notebook or your journal, right? To either take notes of what's happening during your day, your emotional cycles, your triggers, your interactions. What are some of your problematic symptoms? Right. So recall today the homework from this past week was to write down all of your problematic symptoms, right? As many as you can, right? Because then knowing all of those symptoms and putting them right next to each other are helpful to maybe understand who might be even better versus one professional versus the other, right? So I'm not gonna necessarily ask anyone to share their difficulties or their problematic symptoms now, but just to keep them in mind as we continue today's conversation, right? Any difficulties with these, right? I saw hands up, head nods that people were doing these things. Yeah. So any difficulties using these things? Oh yes, Travis.
it's not that I have an issue with them. Like I try. I have a notebook to write in, and I
Good.
take notes and things like that. Um, I was school for me came easy, so I
Yeah.
never really had to push myself or train my brain to constantly, you know, take notes and do
Hmm.
this, and do that. It just like I said, it came natural to me. I don't want to sound conceited, but it did.
Yeah.
I need I need to push. I need to do things that I should have done in the past that I never did,
Ooh,
you know?
I like that, right? So, I mean, I think
Uh,
Pam's nodding her head there because I think I remember you saying one time, Pam, um, the injury brought attention to the things that I should have been caring for before, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, Pam, you had something there?
Um, yes, first, I do have difficulties with regard to doing all these very basic things. That's number one. In particular, the journaling, um, and number two. Boy, when Travis spoke, I just it triggered me to like I have this like I had to speak up because I can so relate to that. And I think for many of us who life seemingly came easy for, um, yeah, I never quote had to attend to things, and for me, there also was an element of like for me it was I had some arrogance about not needing to tend to those things. My sister was very good about, doing her homework, brushing her teeth, all those things that we're taught that we need to do. And I believe that because of my adverse childhood um,
Experiences,
experiences, um,
aces.
ACEs, yes, and the resulting PTSD, I lived in a state of almost panic. And so I didn't tend to the very basic things because I was in such fear of trying to do things good enough, trying to accomplish things good enough, and so I neglected my own self-care, and I never those pathways didn't develop in my brain. So
Perfect. Ooh,
this is my theory right now. Um, Again, I'm sorry. I'm gonna kind of close this because now I remember we're in the recording part, but um,
yeah,
uh, because I have heard this over and over from you, Daniel, the repetition has been just vital for me to finally hear it, and then to give myself the grace to say my brain didn't have those pathways, um, and so at at this age of my life, I have to give myself the grace and compassion that I would give a child for learning these very basic things, and to be very grateful for the opportunity to do so, and to celebrate this, even the smallest sign of um, mastering the ability to have a little routine. So
yeah,
I'll stop right there. But in closing, gratitude and acknowledgement and appreciation for Travis mentioning those things. And I
yeah, I love it.
also could benefit from anybody's experience in developing habits regarding journaling. So thank you. And
Yeah,
if you can't talk about it now, I can maybe bring it up at the at next session or not at all because I know I'll be back and I'll be learning more. Thank you.
perfect. Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I think you phrase that wonderfully, right? Is uh based on our earlier experiences, right? It may not rise to the level of quote unquote diagnosable clinical post traumatic stress or PTSD, but there is acknowledgement of this kind of chronic traumatization, unsafety that then impacts your capacity to develop those pathways, those habits, right? It's CPTSD, right? The DSM doesn't recognize it, but the ICD does. The ICD-11 does, and it's very it separates. It's distinct from PTSD in that it is more of a chronic nature, where PTSD is typically I can identify there is this event. It either I almost died, I heard about someone who almost died, or I got physically severely injured. But not all traumas show up in that fashion, right? For all people. And so, I think you said that beautifully is like, I didn't develop those things and I might have compensated well prior to the injury, but then the injury brought up all of these really important things that I should have been caring about before. Right. So in this way, there is a sense of gratitude for what the lessons that are brought with the injury. As myself, I definitely agree with that. And you really highlighted a lot of these, right? Gratitude, appreciation, right? Grace, right? And so similarly to ourselves, right? If we never had those those appropriate modeling experiences to learn certain things like grace for ourselves, I mean, if we hear the negative self-talk that we tell ourselves, like would we ever talk to a child like that? Right? And so if someone doesn't know, right? Someone doesn't know, how could you potentially be so punitive, right? If someone doesn't know or if someone hasn't been given the opportunities to know or to learn, then really to provide that grace. Yes. Travis, you had something there, sir?
Yeah, and in regards to my comment, Pam, that was beautifully and well spoken. I didn't want to seem narcissistic, you know. That was not, most people would have thought that that was me in the old days. I was just confident in my ability, my ways back in the day. It had nothing to do with narcissism. Things just came naturally to me, you know? And just because things never really came difficult to me, it was the perception that people got of me. That was never
Yeah.
my intent back then. My intent was just to show that
Confident.
I was smart enough
Yeah.
to do the bare, I don't want to say the bare minimum either, but it
Yeah.
just
I think you highlight a really important thing there, Travis, is confidence, right? And when that confidence
exactly.
is shaken,
Yeah.
the whole pyramid starts to tumble.
Yeah.
Right? And yeah, and I love that, right? And so really what we're doing here in these workshops, right, is to provide really those scaffolded experiences so that way collectively as a group we can learn these kind of basic things. And I wouldn't even want to say basic because if they were basic we would have done them already, but these are things that are that help support the brain in doing a lot of the things that may have come more automatic before, right? And maybe some like shake of confidence, shake of cognitive abilities may be impacting this, right? And so how's everyone doing on their goals, right? Like anyone take any progressive steps, right? And remember, it doesn't have to be complete. Small steps count, right? I see that there, Pam, right? Yes, Michelle. Yes, I'm there. Oh, and you're muted, Michelle.
Yeah.
Now I'm not.
Yeah,
There
there
you
you
go.
go.
I learned I learned from my case manager through a study that was done. Those people with just going to call it a higher functioning brain actually have a much greater chance of recovering from TBI and PTSD because we have the I'm going to say innate
Cognitive reserve.
ability reserve. That would be good. We have the cognitive reserve to actually be able to help ourselves more so than the average person. And I can attest to that. I feel that I've been able to use my high IQ to get myself to that next step. Doesn't mean I don't take a step backwards, but so
Right.
don't apologize for being a higher functioning person, because in this phase of your life it may actually give you a great advantage. So that's all I wanted
Right.
to add.
Right. Correct. Thanks, Michelle. Right. Yeah. The cognitive reserve, high cognitive reserve, those are basically at the fundamental level, high levels of cognitive reserve um, protect against decline, right? And allow a stronger foundation to rebuild if necessary, right? And so ways to enhance that cognitive reserve are living those lifestyle management things, those healthy brain pillars, right? And so those are the physical exercise, diet, nutrition, quality sleep, cognitive stimulation, and five is social connectedness. Love that. Love that. And so you shared a goal, right, last week. Hopefully, you've been taking progressive steps. Remember, small steps count, right? They all count. And so, also in our homework assignments for the past week, was to use your metacognitive strategies to do emotional cycles every day or as many days as possible, right? At least one a day or however many you can swing, right? So you can identify, use self-monitoring, which is a metacognitive strategy, to identify your triggers, sensations, thoughts, behaviors, and notice if there are any patterns, right? So you don't have to oh share those right now. Oh, yes, and oh, yeah, yes, and you're muted.
Here we go. Yeah, this is
Yeah.
a pattern, as I shared, I'm 80 years old. One, and I've seen this before. Some things really, really get to me, bother me terribly. And two, women who want to be my friend or longtime friend, she was upset that I had really, I think I cut her off. And then I realized I should tell her what was going on. I said, Wendy, you never talk about yourself. And I have a tendency towards paranoia. She's very psychology oriented, which is true. I just don't. I like to fill me in. What's going on? And that we relax in a relationship. This other woman also always the same level voice, nothing up and down. She is driving and she doesn't talk about herself. But she invited me into a meeting, which means she likes me and she feels I'm an asset in the room. But again, I don't know what to do about it except to ask her, please modulate your voice once in a while. Everything,
That's
you know,
good.
and say something about yourself. I don't know
Yeah,
anything.
that's good,
I
Anne.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
That's it.
I mean that's good, Anne, because really what you also just exhibited there, which you just modeled for everyone, was self-advocacy, right? I have a
Uh-huh.
certain need, and I'm gonna tell you what that is in a very collected, calm fashion, right? And and I love that cat, right? Because essentially what that fence post, that picture, and so for anyone who doesn't see the chat, it is one, two, three, four, five pieces of uneven wood that are painted uh, like a sunflower, right? And so that's beautiful because I like that it's uneven, it's jagged, it's wood that without the painting would look unpleasant,
Oh, that's nice.
right? It would look unpleasant.
Yeah.
However, you do things like you line them up side by side next to each other. You paint a sunflower, two sunflowers on it, and it becomes something that is very pleasant to look at, right? And I think so much of our experiences is embodied by that photo. So thank you, Kat. I saved it and I'm gonna be sharing it.
Thank
That's
you.
beautiful.
This was also about giving myself grace, because I mean I did the uneven heights intentionally, but it was the putting it like on backboards, like on support boards, so I could
Mhm.
freestand. And I can't do simple math anymore well because of the head injuries, and so they're not like perfectly spaced. It's like it's like it's okay. It's art. It's my art. I'm not about
Yeah.
perfection, and then I couldn't figure out how to freestand it. I don't want to attach it to my siding because it's new siding. So I had this little rock bed in front of it. Oh, I painted it different. It's like, just get over yourself. It's fine, you know. But those boards have been done for well over a month, and I was like, just get it finished and put it up there instead of tripping on it. But this also is in memory to my oldest brother's son, Stephen, that was killed at 20 many years ago. He loves sunflowers and unity with Ukraine because my older brother's wife is Ukrainian. So this was a big thing to finish, to show to him, because his son's birthday would be in a couple months. So I was really proud of it. I
Oh.
have no attention span. I'm on to 8 other projects because the doing is more fun than the finishing. But
Yeah.
so yeah,
And that's
so
beautiful. That's so beautiful, Kat. And
yeah.
and you wouldn't know this, but my mother's favorite flowers are sunflowers.
Are they? Yeah, I
Yeah.
love them. I plant like 100 a year at least if the squirrels don't eat all the seeds before they come up. Um,
Yeah. Those
'cause
squirrels.
but that's okay. I
Right.
garden for squirrels. I garden for my squirrels. But
Oh,
anyway,
that's
there's
beautiful, right? Like even in those like the quote unquote pests, right? Is like no, I garden for
I
those.
do.
I garden for them.
I
And
love
so
them. Yeah.
that's so beautiful on so many different levels, Kat. So thank you. Um,
Thanks.
and so
And it
right,
brightened
so
my world. Yeah, it brightened my world and everyone that sees it. So, just working on doing things that uplift me. Anyway,
perfect, man. I
I'll
love that,
that's
right?
it.
So and remember if like going back to the the strategies for triggers is seeking out the positive, right? And so like Kat, you've identified some things that you can seek out in that, right? Oh, thank you, Pam, Mama Ignacio, right? So taking note of all of the problematic behaviors, the thoughts, the triggers, the sensations, etc. Right? We'll brainstorm different solutions today and different modes of therapy for those symptoms. Right? We introduced last week the idea of brain injury resource facilitation, and so to inform everyone and bring everyone up to speed on brain injury resource facilitation, this is a concept that was published in a recent 2025 article in the Journal of Head Trauma Rehabilitation um, uh, about brain injury resource facilitation and the positive impact of this concept in terms of community reintegration for chronic and long-term management of some of these persisting symptoms. And so it starts with um, needs assessment, and so that's part of also what we did in the very beginning. So back in January, right? We were so much younger then, right? And so in January of this year, right? Very beginning of 2025, right? We filled in that thing, and that is partly a needs assessment as well, right? Because we identify what are some of the persisting symptoms, what are some of the challenges and problems, right? So, do you have problems at home? Do you have problems with social? Do you have problems with productive activity, right? And so, are there other health conditions, right? Do you have headaches, migraines, sleep conditions, right? Do you have mood disturbances, right? Depression, anxiety, cognitive symptoms, what seems to be persisting, right? And then we looked at psychosocial things like housing difficulties, employment difficulties, justice system involvements, right? And then looking at the environment, like, do you have a support system? Is there a caregiver there? right? Or you know, are there things that you need in assistance with to kind of help you get back into some of the things through a supportive system? And then third was, well, in that, right, there was also lots of areas where you can identify strengths and available supports, right? So these are the things that need to just be all laid out and put all on the table, just all on the same table so you can see everything, right? And once that is developed, right? Then we can really move toward the next one. And of course, this isn't linear. Progress isn't linear, right, Caitlin? But like the second thing here is then based on those strengths and those challenges, how can we assess the most appropriate services and supports to access, right? Then we follow up. Then you find providers, you find support systems, support groups, cognitive workshops, providers to follow up with you, right? And help advocate, right? Fill in those pesky medical necessity forms and things like that, right? To advocate to Medicaid or Medi-Cal or whatever it is, right? Your insurance company. And so this whole idea here is really owing to major progress in the survivorship following brain injury, right? And so that's a hat tip to, you know, all the acute and subacute care, the medical professionals, right? Because they have done such a great job, right? Because survivorship has increased, right? Because they have done such a great job, they're now when you fix one problem, there typically comes up another problem, right? Exists a pressing need for the development of systems of care, right? Long-term chronic care models and rehabilitation tailored to brain injury. Right, one of these supportive systems is called brain injury resource facilitation. And so, then once you can identify services and supports to access, then the next one is to coordinate these services, right? Coordinate these supports. And Dan, right, shared his experience. Like this is key, right? You know this is key, right? You got to coordinate it, right? It's not just knowing that they exist that's the key. It's got to be coordinated and it's got to be facilitated, right? And so this is where providers can help organize, collect all your documentation, organize it to keep it for you, right? And then share documents, share system and finding, and collaborate with other providers, right, to really inform those best practices. And part of that is then once all of those things can be coordinated in a somewhat organized fashion, right? Then we have to in the next one develop brain injury capacity, and so I think I speak for all of us here at the advisory board, right, Dan? Correct me if I'm wrong. Is now we all must collaborate and advocate for one another to help develop the overall brain injury capacity of our communities, right? And the way that we're going to do this is, of course, we have to screen. Same with us, right? With our symptoms, with our triggers, with our sensations that are problematic and persisting, we've got to screen, right? Because we got to screen to figure out what's working and what's not, right? Like we always say, you can't fix something unless you know it's broke, right? And so the part of that screening is then finding what the challenges are and then accommodating to to be best individually tailored and suited for the findings of that screening, and then sharing the resources, right, amongst us, and then of course the staff competencies, right? And so in another way, right? Not all Cat B sites are created equal, and not all the each one of the individual sites are different. And then, of course, all of the individual staff members that create the those staffs are not always created equal as well. So moving towards a standardized competency. And ultimately, using this brain injury resource facilitation in terms of us as individual survivors, these really are the ones that are in the process, right? So these ones are more so for the organizational levels. Um, and so here as we discussed, like in session one, right? The model care for chronic brain injury, right? It's through our time together, right? This is us here in the center. As individuals, we are part of the community. And in our communities, there either is a supportive environment that we either have to create ourselves, or that, we're fortunate and blessed enough, like, to be able to have support systems already in place, right? Or you can find ways to kind of create that yourself. And then the resources, the community resources, and the public policies that are available, right? And the public policies sometimes inadvertently exclude individuals with brain injury because it's a quote unquote medical condition, right? And so that may be another issue as well, right? And then prior to getting out into the community, there is of course the healthcare system, right? That we have to really have to coordinate and integrate with community in order for us in the center. And so these are things like through our time together, right? The exercises, the homework, our discussions, the self reflections, all the metacognitive strategies that I keep pushing down your throats, right? Can you identify who or what is readily available that creates a supportive system, supportive environment for you? Right? And this is individual, right? So if you have family, if you have brothers, sisters, kids, parents, etc., or furry family members, right? And so all of these things, right? We're going to talk about the available community resources today, some of the community resources today, and the policies that are in place that affect eligibility. And so these are the quote unquote diagnoses, right? Which creates the medical necessity forms, etc. Right, and then we'll discuss multidisciplinary programs, right? And so last week we talked about those updated clinical practice guidelines. Number 11 was in specialty programs. And then the clinical information systems, right? So these are important for those forms. So those things, the questionnaires that you fill out, ultimately to facilitate shared decision making, right? Because it's your health, right? It's your health, right? The decision making should be shared, right? And then self management for support, right? Self management. So creating this self management piece is the thing that we can address but on our own, right? And so, for example, um, these there are public policies or resources, but then for example with the health management piece, right here in the center, that really connects the community to the healthcare system, right? These two things is that self-management piece. And so one really important program or intervention that is developed for this is called right, the connection between the two, it's called Self Advocacy for Independent Life Workshop. And it was developed out of the Brain Injury Association of Colorado, right? I put a link there, and so everyone's gonna get these slides, and so I didn't get the chance to, right? So everyone will get these slides, so please just bear with me here. And so I've also put in the slides, there is a URL for the Brain Injury Association of Colorado, and they provide these workshops, right? And you can sign up for them virtually. But the next one in April is full. So you kind of we have to constantly monitor. So as soon as it's open, we can all fill all the spots. So I'll keep everyone updated, but the next one is full. But it's called SAIL, right? SAIL is a program that is aimed to empower individuals with beliefs, knowledge, and skills to advocate for their needs and wishes after brain injury, right? It's intended for individuals to advocate for themselves and family members who advocate for them or with them, right? And another way to say it, which I still love, it came from the cognitive workshop I don't know, like 4 years ago, is the definition of self advocacy is knowing the right words to tell the right people at the right time. Love that. And so, sale, we'll talk about it briefly. And so, the sale intervention is 4 weeks or 4 sessions, and the first session is defining self advocacy, right? And it's awareness, right? I think Pam and Travis and Michelle, in the very beginning, you guys were just talking about all these great things that have now increased your awareness, right, to some of the challenges as well as the strengths that you still have, right? And how these inform your needs. And then and then also knowing the knowledge of TBI and community resources, which we're all I think largely in very different counties, maybe even different states, right? So and so I really have tried to minimize any specific agency recommendations, and in favor of more um, terms and items that you can look up in your area. And then so knowing the strategies for self-care, that's the brain health pillars, right? And organization and preparation. And so how can I keep all of my forms in order over time and then track them over time? And then of course effective communication. And then we practice in supportive environments like these. And then the second part is also self assessment. Those strengths and challenges come up again, as well as the goal setting, right? And goal setting, we just saw in the previous slides, was goals that are smart, right? Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and then time bound. Second intervention, our second session of sale, is to find ways to take care of yourself, right? And part of this cognitive workshop, the if you didn't have a goal in the beginning, the recommendation that I had was, hey, there are 5 brain health pillars for healthy brain health lifestyles. If you don't have a goal, pick one of those 5 pillars, and your goal should be related to one of those 5. If you can improve or integrate one of those 5 in your life more now than when you started this workshop, that is a huge success. Huge success, right? And so and then we'll get into those in just a moment. And the second one is to gather information, right? As we talk about, right? I mean, Dan, you said in the beginning, right, the knowledge is empowering, right? If self-advocacy is all about empowering, then by that case education is self-advocacy, right? And so part of that is understanding the brain and brain injury. And so and then understanding the community resources and which ones are best apt to access depending on your specific symptoms, right? And so uh, frontal lobe, those higher executive functions. Temporal lobe is processing, language, memory. Parietal, which is the upper sides. This is like somatosensory, your body orientation, your body in space. The occipital lobe in the back. This is like sight, visual recognition, and those kind of things. And right, and so typically, right, um, brain injury doesn't just you know uh, lead to difficulties in just one area. Typically, if it was the classic traumatic brain injury, you will get diffused axonal injury, which is means the whole thing gets rocked. And so then and then maybe some parts of the brain get rocked more than others, and then the brain all coordinates and collaborates with itself. So then depending on where your brain was injured, and to what extent, and then are there comorbidities, are there other health conditions, is there mental health now concerns, and all of this now, it shows up very differently for everybody, right? Because everyone's situation circumstances are different, right? And then more so, right, we talked about brain injury as a dynamic, quote unquote dynamic condition, meaning that it's changing, right? So you might be fine doing like repetitions, right? Repetition, and you get a routine, and you're good. And then as soon as that repetition or as soon as that routine gets thrown off, all your systems crumble to the ground, right? Because the brain is changeable, right? Like depending on different circumstances, different situations, different days, different times, 1 month, 1 year, 10 years after injury, how things change in your life, right? Change is one of the only constants in life. And as things change, that imposes a differing level of stress on your brain. And that change on your system may lead to the rising of your symptoms again, or the arising of new symptoms that you've not seen, or maybe a combination of symptoms that you used to see that are now maybe something different. And so sale intervention 3 and 4 are all about improving your organization, right? And this is, we talk about the 4 core strategies, right? Improving your organization. How can we do that from day to day? Put your keys by the keyring on the door. Put your cell phone, put your wallet, put your journal in the decorative bowl by your bedstand or in the kitchen, right? You can have more than one decorative bowl. Use automatic places so that you put these things wherever you need them, right? So that way, when you need to access your calendar, or you need to know what's coming up, or you have set reminders on your calendar so that your phone dings. I mean, like you should see all of the tech that I wear on any given day. Like something's always beeping, something's always vibrating, right? And then I gotta check it. And then I mean those, right? Those are the things, right? And then and perfect. And then the journaling piece, right? And so the journal really is just there to help aid as a short-term memory assistant, really. And also by you taking the time to put memories or experiences in a journal, that is literally you putting your own experiences into your own words, literally, because you literally have to put whatever it is you're trying to remember in your own words in order to write it down, right? And putting it in your own words is, in fancier terms, is called encoding, right? And so encoding is the first step to that chain that leads to your memories, right? So that your memories are there when you need them, right? And then, of course, principle 4 is assertively communicate and negotiate when necessary. And remember our active communication acronym, LEAP. L is for listen actively. E is eliminate distractions. A is ask questions, and P is to paraphrase, right? And paraphrasing means also putting things into your own words. And then once you're able to do these things in the sale intervention up to this point, then you contract, right? And I mean that informally and formally, to have someone monitor your progress. It could be you, could be a loved one, could be a caregiver, and then create your advocacy action plan. And then, of course, schedule consistent follow up with providers. So now that you guys have all filled in the our that initial assessment of strengths and weaknesses, now I'm I'm gonna follow up with you every 6 months, right? Whether you like it or not. Yes, absolutely. Right. And so pillars of brain health, right? I'm going to follow up with you so that I can ask, are you doing your physical exercise? Right. And so these are things that enhance neuroplasticity. They improve your mood and help you manage your stress. A healthy diet, nutrition. And if you would like some more information on Brain Health Pillar 2, here is our website. And on our website, sjbin.org, under Brain Health Education, there are 2 videos that I would like you to bring back. Um, uh, I would like to bring to your attention. One is from one of our own, right? Dr. Eric Sternlicht, yes, sports physiologist and nutritionist. He's got really tons of great recommendations in his video. And then the second video was from Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, who is, a big name in nutrition. Then sleep. Are you getting good sleep? Right? Sleep quality, right? Sleep quality. Are you getting to sleep well? Are you staying asleep? Then there's mental stimulation, right? Are you engaged in activities that are either productive or are stimulating? And then social connectedness. Are you leaning into those relationships that we identified in week 7 or week 8 or week 9? Right? And if you are, are there things that you can do more of? Or if you're not, are there other relationships that that we can do to kind of change this? I know we were talking earlier about yeah, kids and what have you, and after the injury the relationships seem to change, and that may also be a function of that dynamic shift overlaid on top of just teenagers like growing into adolescence, and that, so that further complicates it, right? So and being able to find ways to relate to and identify with your different relationships, right? And I think that nicely identifies how, when after the injury, our things may change, like our independence may change temporarily, our cognition may be disrupted temporarily, and so that leads to other things that may need to change. Our interests may change, just because it's not like risky behavior may not be something that you want to continue after an injury. um or to each their own, but for those that maybe like, okay, maybe I should not really do so much of that, then that can change your interest. And when your interest change, that changes the relation, the like your capacity to relate to the old relationships that you used to have. And when those or like when the things, then the interest change, then the way you relate changes, then the people that you used to relate to, because of the things that are now changed, those are now different. And so there's nothing wrong with pathways going different ways, right? And so going back right now to a model of neuropsychological model of functional outcomes after a brain injury, right? So there is the neurologic conditions, right? In that, on that far left, these all neurologic factors, cognitive factors, psychological factors, physical factors, all lead to the holy grail of acute brain injury recovery, which is functional outcome, right? So if you think about the neurologic factors, here are some of, this list is not comprehensive, but here are some of the neurologic and medical care, the professionals that you may see, and these are all doctors, right? So if you need, when someone tells you, oh, you need to go see a doctor, all right, which one? Right? Right, which one? Right, because it's important. And so like typically when people talk about the doctors, it's number 3, right? That primary care physician who manages your general health. But depending, not that, that there may be differences in maybe your PCP within a healthcare system may not have access to all these other doctors or specialties, so they may not know to refer to them, or they may have limited specialty knowledge in brain injury, and or there may be a whole different reasons as to why, right? So but there may be a physiatrist, right, which is a PM&R physician or rehab physician, and really oversees a lot of those rehab programs. A neurologist, and there's a subspecialty in neurology called headache migraine neurology, right? So if that is your symptom, that may be the most appropriate neurologist to see. There is a psychiatrist who manages psychiatric conditions, right? And you know and endocrinologists that evaluate their hormone or your endocrine function, your hormones. Their hormones may be imbalanced, and then also per note. There may also be specialists who are brain injury informed, right? Though they are informed, neurologically informed is another word for that. They are informed of central nervous system conditions and how that impacts brain and behavior. And so, in these areas that you may want to identify, typically these specialists have a neuro in front of their name, but not always, right? I don't want to, pigeonhole that. Sometimes someone who is neurologically informed may not identify as a neuropsychiatrist or a neuroendocrinologist, but if you can identify a neuropsychiatrist or a neuroendocrinologist, though they may be important in monitoring specific either neuropsychiatric conditions or neuroendocrine dysfunction as a result of some central nervous system disruption, which brain injury is one. Brain injury and spinal cord injury. Then there are physical factors, and so for physical factors, they're these are also called neuro rehabilitation, right? So there's that neuro specialty again, right? So there could be occupational therapists, which assists with like daily living, fine motor skills, vocational training, driving training, right? And so there are also neuro OTs in some places. Physical therapists, these address gross motor, really balance, coordination issues. They many of them are trained in dual task training, which has been shown to improve cognitive outcomes following brain injury. There are also neuro PT specialists. And so there are next number three is speech language pathologists or SLPs or speech therapists. These help with communication deficits, and in week 7, I believe that was those cognitive communication impairments, right? Those social, those verbal and nonverbal social cues that you may or may not be missing, right? So all of those cognitive communication impairments, those become specialties of speech pathologists, particularly if you can find a neuro SLP, right? And then, of course, also in physical factors, right? Like, let's not forget community resources, right? So if you have physical deficits, like I can't walk safely, I have balance coordination issues, or I can't move or navigate safely, there are there are transportation services in four. Right, these are paratransit, ADA transportation services here in Orange County. It's OCTA, Orange County Transit, right? Or for ADA disability, it's called Access for Us. And so, looking into your individual county to see what's available in terms of transportation services, and your insurance typically covers some transportation services. You just got to call and figure out what those benefits are. Um, and this is particularly important, right? Because for those who can't drive, right? What if you can't drive? This also supports job and community access, right? And navigating public transit, because those things are complicated. The buses may not be on time, and that throws off all the other schedules for the rest of the day, right? So for physical factors, number 4, community interventions are also very, very important to consider, right? Because as we remember that be healthy model, the big circle that basically represents the recovery and rehabilitation of the survivor in the center. There are two parts of that circle. One is the healthcare system, and the other part is, which is actually subsumes the smaller healthcare circle, is the community, right? And so community resources need to be considered as well, right? So typically, when it comes to health or disability or incapacity for productive activity, typically it's like the healthcare system. Well, there's also something to be said about community resources. And then, so next are psychological factors. And so, psychological factors, these could be clinical psychologists, and then there's that neuro again, right? The neuro specialty, the neuropsychologists. Particularly, these are intervention neuropsychologists. Most neuropsychologists currently, and there's hopefully will be a shift later on to some more equality in here, but currently, most neuropsychologists are assessment based, right? Some are intervention focused, which consider the interaction between brain and behavior following a neurologic condition. And then there's psychiatrists, right, which identify give medications and counseling in terms of some of the anxiety or depression or stress. Maybe you're having some seeing or hearing things that others aren't, or maybe a counselor, right, working with adjustment and emotional regulation. A whole lot of what I see in some survivors is with all of these changes, with all this change, and now I'm not as independent as I used to be. Now I relate differently, and and I can adjust well, and the way that they cope with that difference is either coping with food, like I did. I emotionally ate, right? I emotionally ate a lot, or you find yourself with a substance use disorder, right? And so finding different counselors depending on could be helpful as well. And then here, another hat tip to the community resources are community-based resources like mental health agencies or peer support groups, like this one, or the ones that we have on Fridays, or the ones that we'll have tonight for caregivers, right, Caitlin? And perfect. And so, um, next, we have objective cognitive, right? And so there are a ton of different things here, but basically, these are the neuropsychologists that evaluate you with some standardized tests to compare you to some normative sample, right? And so, depending on your neurologic conditions, how normative uh, is normative, or what is normative, and what's normative for you may not necessarily be appropriate if you're being compared to the general population. And that takes a certain tact to identify, right? Which neuropsychologists are well equipped to do. Um, and then there are cognitive rehabilitation therapists. And so these work on individual things like memory, attention, executive functions, right? And develop compensatory strategies to target the specific deficit that you're having. And hopefully through the last 11 weeks, you're now better prepared just a little bit to have that conversation should you decide to go down this route. Then there are, of course, community-based resources, of course, right? And vocational rehabilitation counselors, right? Hat tip to you, Dan, right? This assesses work capabilities, job modifications, job coaching and retraining, which is so important, right? I mean, like, Rosie was just talking about like how 2 p.m. comes along and she starts taking a nosedive. And so in those cases, a job coach would help her be more successful in those circumstances, or an accommodated, right? This is a situation where advocacy would be important from a community worker to suggest and advocate for accommodations that maybe she should have a shorter workday or start her workday earlier, right? So those are some of those kind of creative things, right? And then connecting to supportive employment and programs. There's also independent living specialists that teach independent living skills. These are also seen at like ILCs, or independent living centers, that are all over California. And it really helps you develop a structured routine for daily activities. Then there is subjective cognitive, right? So, and what makes these confusing, right, is, like I was saying, is subjective and objective cognitive are different things, but they're treated by the same people. right? And so like you're typically referred to the same people, right? For both, right? Even though and then then that puts you on the path for to a very confusing conversation where you're having subjective cognitive complaints, then you get sent to a neuropsychologist who evaluates you typically just for objective cognitive, right? And then keep in mind these tests are in controlled environments, right? It's one on one. They're very controlled, right? They're very controlled and only they're distraction free, right? And they're in very sterile environments, and so and then they're accommodating, right? And so these tests, the objective neuropsychological tests, may not pick up certain things because of the nature of the controlled nature of how they're administered. And then when they're scored, they come out as there's no issue, and then that is at odds with your subjective experience of cognitive deficits. And that intersection is just one example of what we were saying earlier, brain injury as a quote unquote dynamic condition, right? When you put distractions in, when you put things or that there's different things or like you're tracking multiple things, then endurance may be an issue, fatigue may be an issue, right? And all of those, right? So those are important things to consider as well. um and in those subjective complaints, maybe there might be a social worker, right, come into play, those community resources to help you navigate those disability benefits, right? Apply for SSI, SSDI. What's the difference? How do I even know? Medicaid, there's all these different eligibility criterias, right? And the assets, $2,000 asset thing that was always there in 2024 in California, that was removed, right? And so the asset thing was removed January 1st of 2024. And so, and then there are other eligibility criteria, like for if you're disabled, aging, or blind. And so there are all these other nuances. And how would you know these, right? Like this isn't like common knowledge. They don't teach. I don't remember learning about this in high school or in college, right? And so like unless you're like specifically like in a social work track potentially, right? And so really these are really to help connect you to community reintegration programs and housing supports if necessary, right? Cal aim, right, in California is the California Innovating and Advancing Medicaid, or Medi-Cal, in our state. And so there are enhanced case managers, right? And there are community supports that are now available, which weren't before. So these are relatively recent. And how would you know those, right? And then there's the speech language pathologist, because of their specialty in working with cognitive communication impairments. So, if you are having difficulties with relating with other people or having social interactions that are not helpful or not beneficial or troublesome, then maybe speaking to SLP, if you can find a neuro SLP and say specifically, I'm having cognitive communication impairments. That's what I want to work on.